Logan Reyes was 6 years old. He weighed 42 pounds. He had a gap between his two front teeth that his grandmother said made him look like he was always about to tell you something funny. And on the morning of September 14th, 1987, he walked out of his front yard in Laredo, Texas, and was gone before his mother reached the back door. That is not a story about a child who wandered off. That is a story about a family that was fractured so completely that it took 38 years, a database that didn't exist when Logan disappeared, and a retired postal worker in Corpus Christi to finally put the pieces back together. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to that September morning in 1987. Because to understand what was found, you first have to understand what was lost. Laredo in the late 1980s was the kind of South Texas border city that operated at its own particular rhythm, slow in the midday heat, alive in the evenings when families pulled their chairs onto cement porches and let the ceiling fans turn inside the houses. The neighborhood where the Reyes family lived, a cluster of stucco homes on Calle Hidalgo near the old rail yard, had been home to the same 6 or 7 families for a generation. Neighbors shared fence lines and borrowed sugar and watched each other's children in the way that small, tight-knit communities still did back then, before the world taught everyone to keep their eyes forward. Rosa Reyes had moved into the house on Calle Hidalgo in 1979, 2 years before Logan was born. She worked the morning shift at a commercial laundry on Highway 83, ironing and pressing and folding for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and she was one of those women who seemed to carry her exhaustion the way other people carry a coat, always there, but never letting it stop her. Her husband, Marco, drove long-haul freight routes that took him out of Laredo for stretches of 5 and 6 days at a time. The marriage had been fraying for 2 years by the fall of 1987, quietly and then less quietly. And by September of that year, the household on Calle Hidalgo had the particular tension of a family still deciding what it was going to become. Logan was the youngest of 3. He had an older sister, Diana, who was 11, and a brother, Ernesto, who was 9. By all accounts, Logan was the kind of child who made rooms feel larger, loud, inventive, perpetually in motion, obsessed with a battered Tonka dump truck that he took everywhere he could get away with. His kindergarten teacher at Martin Elementary had noted in his file that he was extremely social and curious, often the last to settle. His grandmother, Esperanza Reyes, who lived 4 blocks away and watched the children on Rosa's workdays, said that Logan had a habit of collecting small rocks and leaving them in his shoes, and that she had never been able to explain why, and had long ago stopped trying. That Monday morning, September 14th, was a school holiday. Rosa was due at the laundry for a half shift. Diana and Ernesto were going to a neighbor's house for the morning. Logan, who had a low-grade fever the night before that seemed to have cleared, was going to stay home with Esperanza, who was due to arrive by 8. Rosa left the house at 7:45. Esperanza arrived at 8:12. In the 27 minutes between, Logan Reyes was last seen in the front yard, rolling his Tonka truck along the low concrete border of the flower bed. The truck was still there when Esperanza pushed open the gate. Logan was not. She called out. She checked the house. She went to the yards on either side. She found nothing. By 8:30, she was on the phone with Rosa, who left the laundry before her shift began, and was back on Calle Hidalgo by 9. By 9:15, the Laredo Police Department had received their first call about a missing child. By noon, the neighborhood was searched. By evening, 6-year-old Logan Reyes had not been found. By the following morning, he had vanished completely. Investigators noted at the time that there were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses who had seen the boy leave the yard, and no physical evidence along the fence line or the sidewalk in front of the house. What there was, and what would take on significance much later, was a neighbor's account that a dark blue pickup truck had been parked on the cross street for part of the morning. The neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Cantu, thought it had been there when he went out for his paper. He could not recall the plates. He did not think much of it. He mentioned it almost as an afterthought to the second officer who spoke with him that afternoon, and the notation was logged in the case file, and then largely set aside in the pressure of the initial search. The lead detective assigned to Logan's case was a 15-year veteran of the Laredo PD named Detective Hector Vizquez, a compact, deliberate man who had worked missing persons cases before, but had never lost a young child. Records show that Vizquez was at the Reyes house within 90 minutes of the initial call and remained the primary investigator for the next 11 months. People who worked with him recalled that he had a habit of reading case files at the end of his shift, at his kitchen table, with the radio on low. His wife had told him more than once to leave it at the station. The early investigation identified two persons of interest. The first was Marco Reyes, Logan's father, whose relationship with Rosa had become openly hostile by that summer. Marco had a verifiable alibi. He was logged into a truck stop in San Antonio at 7:18 that morning, with a fuel receipt and a witness. But he remained under informal scrutiny for weeks, a reality that Rosa found unbearable. The second person of interest was a man named Gerald Pruitt, a distant relative of a neighbor who had been seen in the area twice in the month before Logan disappeared, and who had a prior conviction for contributing to the delinquency of a minor in New Mexico. Pruitt was interviewed, polygraphed, and ultimately cleared when his whereabouts for the morning of September 14th were confirmed through a parole check in log. Neither lead went anywhere. The case file documents that by November 1987, the active investigation had stalled. A tip line had generated more than 200 calls, none of which produced actionable information. The blue pickup truck was never identified. The search of the surrounding areas had been extended outward in concentric circles, to the river, to the highway, to the adjacent Colonia neighborhoods, and turned up nothing. Detective Vizquez wrote in his November report, "No physical evidence recovered. No confirmed sightings. Case remains open and active." Rosa Reyes was not told that the investigation had, in practical terms, slowed to a near stop. She found out the way families always do, through the silences, through the calls she made that took longer and longer to be returned, through the shift from urgency to procedure to routine that she could feel in the way officers spoke to her, not unkindly, but with the particular gentleness that people use when they are preparing someone for a grief they cannot prevent. By 1990, 3 years had passed since Logan disappeared from the yard on Calle Hidalgo. Rosa had returned to the laundry. Diana was 14. Ernesto was 12. The household on Calle Hidalgo continued, in the mechanical way that households do, even when something essential has been removed from the center of them. Marco Reyes had moved to Corpus Christi by 1989. The divorce was finalized the following year. He called the children on their birthdays and at Christmas, and he and Rosa spoke rarely and briefly. By 1994, 7 years in, Logan's case had been classified as a cold case by the Webb County Sheriff's Department, which had absorbed it from the Laredo PD during a jurisdictional reorganization. Detective Vizquez, who had retired in 1993, kept his own copy of the case file in a manila folder in his study. He referred to it, in the private way of men who do not easily let things go, as the Reyes file. His wife had stopped asking about it. The house next door to Rosa had sold twice. The neighborhood had changed around it. New families, a different grocery store on the corner. The old rail yard redeveloped into a logistics hub that brought strangers through at all hours. Diana finished high school and moved to San Antonio for nursing school. Ernesto stayed in Laredo, got married, had 2 daughters of his own. Rosa remained in the house on Calle Hidalgo. She had not changed the color of the front door. She had kept Logan's Tonka truck in a plastic bin in the hall closet, inside a paper bag. The way you keep something you cannot look at, but cannot leave. Each September 14th, she and Esperanza, now in her late 80s and fragile in the way of very old women, but still present, would light a candle at the kitchen table and sit together without saying much. It was not a ritual anyone had planned. It had simply become the shape of what that day meant. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, cross-referencing records, locating documents, and building the real story of real people who deserve to have their names remembered. If you want us to keep doing this work, take a second to like this video and subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes it possible. Now let's get back to Rosa. By 2010, 23 years had passed. The reward poster that a neighbor's church had printed in 1988 had long since disappeared from local storefronts. Logan Reyes existed in the public record and, quietly, in the hearts of the people who had loved him, and almost nowhere else. Then, in 2025, something happened that no one had anticipated. The case that everyone but Rosa had given up on found its way back to the light. On a Wednesday afternoon in March 2025, a genetic genealogist named Claudia P. was working a contract with the Texas Department of Public Safety's Cold Case Unit when she cross-referenced an unidentified male profile, uploaded to a genealogy database 2 years earlier by a man seeking his own biological family history, and found a pattern of familial matches that pointed, with increasing specificity, toward a family cluster in South Texas. She sat with it for a moment. Read the connections again. The markers aligned through 3 different branches. She pulled up the original missing persons flag that had been linked to the Dina profile, and then she looked up the case number attached to that flag. She made a call. The process, for anyone unfamiliar, works like this. A Dina sample collected from a crime scene or, in this case, from a personal item retained by a family. Logan's hairbrush, preserved in evidence for decades, is uploaded to a public ancestry database. When distant relatives of the missing person have also submitted their own Dina to those same databases, perhaps searching for their own family history, never knowing what they're helping to solve, the system identifies shared genetic segments. A trained genealogist then traces those shared segments backward through family trees, branch by branch, until a probable identity emerges. The Texas DP's Cold Case Unit had been running through backlogs for 18 months. Logan Reyes's file had come up in a batch review. What Claudia P. had found was not a body. It was not a crime scene. What the Dina told her was that a living man, 44 years old, currently residing in Beaumont, Texas, shared a genetic profile consistent with being Logan Reyes. He had been searching for his biological family. He had submitted his Dina voluntarily, not knowing that somewhere in a state database there was a hairbrush in a paper bag that was waiting to answer him back. Investigators would later confirm that this man, who had been raised under a different name by a family that had taken him in as a young child under circumstances that were, according to court records, irregular at best, had never been told the full truth of where he had come from. He knew he had been raised by people who were not his biological parents. He did not know that his original name was Logan. He did not know that there was a woman on Calle Hidalgo who had kept his hairbrush in a paper bag for 38 years. What came next unfolded over 6 weeks, moving faster than cases of this age typically move. The Webb County investigator assigned to reopen the file was a younger detective named Marisol Fuentes, who had been with the department for 9 years and had worked 3 cold cases to resolution, none of which had prepared her for this one. Court documents confirmed that she contacted the man in Beaumont within 48 hours of receiving Claudia P.'s report. She described the call, in a later interview, as one of the strangest conversations she had ever had professionally. Telling a 44-year-old man that his name might not be his name. That there might be a family in Laredo who had been looking for him for nearly 4 decades, and that the science was telling her, with a very high degree of confidence, that she was right. The man, who had gone by the name David for his entire adult life, was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he said, "My kid's grandmother, my adoptive mother. She always said I used to collect rocks. She could never explain why." A court-ordered DNA comparison between David and Ernesto Reyes, Logan's surviving brother, was processed in under 3 weeks. The match was confirmed on April 22, 2025. Logan Reyes had been found. He was alive. He was 44 years old. And the woman who had last seen him rolling a Tonka truck along a flower bed was 81 years old, still living in the house on Calle Hidalgo, with the front door still painted the same color it had been the morning he disappeared. As for how Logan had come to be raised under a different name and a different life, records show that in the months following his disappearance, a man who had lived briefly in the Laredo area, and who would eventually be identified through genealogical and documentary records as connected to a network of informal, undocumented child placements that Texas authorities in the late 1980s had investigated but never fully unraveled, had relocated to East Texas. The full accounting of how Logan Reyes traveled from a front yard in Laredo to a life in Beaumont is still being reconstructed by investigators and the Webb County District Attorney's Office. The man believed to have removed Logan from Calle Hidalgo that September morning died in 2011. He had never been charged with anything related to Logan's disappearance. He never will be. The community of Laredo learned the news on a Wednesday morning in late April 2025 through a press release from the Webb County Sheriff's Office that was brief, careful, and careful for good reason, because Logan himself was still processing what his life had just become, and the privacy his family asked for was, by every account, the least anyone could give them. There is a photograph that Rosa Reyes kept on the mantel above her fireplace for 38 years. In it, Logan is wearing a red shirt with a small dinosaur on the pocket. He is laughing at something outside the frame. Whatever it was must have been genuinely funny, because the laugh is not a posed one. It is the laugh of a child who has been surprised into joy. His gap-toothed grin is exactly what his grandmother said it always looked like he is about to tell you something. In May 2025, for the first time since 1987, Rosa Reyes showed that photograph to the person in it. What passed between them in those early meetings is theirs. It is not a detail that belongs in this video or in any video. What we know is that Logan Reyes, who is asked to continue being called David in his daily life, because that name belongs to his children, and his memories, and the self he built over 4 decades, has described his biological mother as a woman who clearly knew how to love something and not let go. He said this in a brief statement he gave to a local outlet in Beaumont, and then he said nothing more publicly. That seems right. Diana Reyes, now a registered nurse in San Antonio, told a reporter, "We never stopped looking. We stopped hoping, sometimes, but we never stopped looking." Ernesto Reyes, who drove to Beaumont the week after the DINA confirmation with his wife and 2 daughters, said only that the meeting was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and that he planned to teach his brother to fish, and that it was going to take some patience because he suspected Logan was not a natural. Detective Hector Vizquez, now 84 and living in San Antonio, was reached by phone after the announcement. According to his daughter, who was in the room, he did not say much. He asked if the boy was okay. He was told that the boy was 44 and appeared to be doing well. He reportedly nodded for a long time before responding. "Good," he said. "That's good." The case of Logan Reyes asks a question that is easy to overlook in the relief of the outcome. How many children who vanished from front yards and playgrounds in the 1970s and 1980s were not murdered, but moved, relocated by people who operated in the gaps of a child welfare system that, in that era, had significant and well-documented holes. Investigators working with the Webb County DA's office have noted that the network connected to Logan's disappearance may have placed as many as 12 children across Texas and neighboring states in those years. The investigation into those cases remains ongoing. Justice, complete, formal, certain, did not come for Logan Reyes. The man most likely responsible for taking him from his family is dead. He will never stand in a courtroom. He will never answer the question that Rosa has carried for 38 years. Why? But something else came. Something rarer, and in some ways more difficult to hold than justice, because it requires you to rebuild a life rather than close a chapter. It requires the hard, patient work of becoming a family again across 4 decades of separation, of learning a brother's laugh and a mother's habits, and all the small specific facts of people you love but do not yet know. Logan Reyes came home. Not to the boy's life that was taken from him, but home. Before this video ends, we'd like to ask you a few things, because the comment section on cases like this one tends to become something worth reading. What do you think about the unresolved accountability here? Can a case feel solved when the person responsible is already gone? What surprised you most about how this case finally broke open? And what does it say about the gaps that existed in the child welfare system of that era, and whether we have closed them? Let us know what you think below. Justice found Logan Reyes after 38 years. Stories like his are why this channel exists. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, and that some stories are still being written, long after everyone assumed they were over, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. There are more waiting. Thank you for being here.